The rumble of the L train was a constant soundtrack to Miles Corbin's young life in Englewood, a neighborhood in Chicago that held both vibrant life and unspoken hardships. Miles wasn't a boy of boisterous laughter or quick retorts. He was a quiet observer, his dark eyes often downcast, his thoughts a swirling galaxy of patterns and possibilities. While other kids his age were on the basketball courts or glued to video games, Miles found solace in the silent 64 squares of a chessboard. His sanctuary was the back corner of the neighborhood library, a space bathed in the soft glow of a lone window. Here, amidst the hushed whispers and the rustling of pages, Miles would lose himself in the intricate dance of pawns, knights, bishops, rooks, and the all-important king and queen. He'd learned the game from his grandfather, a retired postal worker with hands gnarled by years of sorting mail, and a mind as sharp as any grandmaster's. Grandpa Earl had seen the flicker of intense focus in Miles's eyes, even when he was just a little tyke, pushing wooden pieces around with more curiosity than understanding. "Chess ain't just a game, Miles," Grandpa Earl would say, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "It's about seeing ahead, about thinking deeper than the surface. It's about strategy, yes, but more than that, it's about understanding people, their moves, their weaknesses." Miles had taken those words to heart. While he might stumble over his words in a classroom presentation or shrink away from a crowded playground, on the chessboard, his mind was a steel trap, anticipating moves, calculating risks, and orchestrating elegant checkmates. But the world outside the quiet corner of the library wasn't always so understanding. At West Englewood High, Miles was an easy target for the casual cruelty that often festers in teenage hallways. His quiet nature was mistaken for weakness, his intense focus for oddness. And leading the charge was a boy named Kevin, a broad-shouldered, loud-mouthed kid whose father, Mr. Thompson, was a local legend, the reigning Illinois state chess champion. Kevin seemed to take particular delight in making Miles's life miserable. It started with whispers and shoves in the crowded hallways. "Hey, Silent Bob," he'd sneer, elbowing Miles as he passed. "Still staring at those little wooden dolls?" His cronies would snicker, echoing his taunts. The bullying escalated. Miles's books would mysteriously end up in the trash. His meager lunch money would vanish from his locker. And online, anonymous comments would mock his quiet demeanor and his passion for chess. "Why don't you just disappear, Corbin?" one comment read. Nobody would even notice. These words, these constant jabs, chipped away at Miles's confidence, making him retreat further into himself. He started avoiding the school cafeteria, eating his lunch in the empty band room, the silence a small comfort. He walked with his head down, his shoulders hunched, trying to become invisible in the crowded corridors. One afternoon, after a particularly humiliating incident where Kevin had knocked his chessboard off a table in the library, scattering the pieces like fallen soldiers, Miles felt a surge of something he hadn't felt before. Not just hurt, but anger. He looked up at Kevin, his eyes, usually soft and hesitant, now holding a flicker of defiance. Kevin, surprised by Miles's gaze, just smirked. "What's wrong, Silent Bob? Gonna cry to your grandpa?" Miles didn't cry. He simply gathered his scattered pieces, his hands trembling slightly. But inside, a seed of resolve had been planted. He wouldn't disappear. He wouldn't let Kevin's cruelty define him. He would find his voice, not in shouting or fighting, but in the quiet language he understood best. The language of chess. That evening, Miles told Grandpa Earl about the escalating bullying. His grandfather listened patiently, his brow furrowed with concern. When Miles was finished, Grandpa Earl didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He simply placed a calloused hand on Miles's shoulder. "Miles," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You can't let fear win. Kevin's acting out because of his own insecurities, maybe even jealousy. Your quiet strength, your focus, those are gifts. Don't let anyone dim them." Then Grandpa Earl did something unexpected. He pulled out an old leather-bound book from his bookshelf. It was a collection of annotated chess games by some of the greatest players in history. "Study these, Miles," he said. "See how they turned defense into attack. How they used their opponent's aggression against them. Remember, sometimes the quietest player makes the loudest move." Miles devoured the book, the complex strategies and brilliant maneuvers filling his mind. He spent hours practicing, his fingers moving the pieces with newfound determination. He wasn't just playing anymore. He was strategizing, planning, learning to anticipate not just the moves on the board, but the moves of his unseen opponents in the real world. He noticed that Kevin often bragged about his father's chess prowess, how Mr. Thompson was unbeatable, a tactical genius. A thought began to form in Miles's mind, a daring, almost audacious idea. What if he could challenge Mr. Thompson? What if he could show Kevin and everyone else that quiet strength could be more powerful than loud aggression? He knew it was a long shot, a near impossible dream. Mr. Thompson was a seasoned player, a master of the game. Miles was just a high school kid who found solace in the library. But the idea wouldn't let go. It was a spark of hope in the darkness, a chance to prove his worth, not through words, but through the silent battle on the checkered board. He started researching local chess tournaments, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. He found one scheduled for the end of the month, at a community center a few neighborhoods over. It was open to players of all levels, and the top prize was a considerable scholarship. Miles knew he had to enter. It wasn't just about facing Mr. Thompson anymore. It was about proving to himself that he wasn't invisible, that his quiet dedication had value, that even in the face of bullying, he could find his own powerful move. The quiet squares of Englewood had begun to shape a silent revolution within him. The community center buzzed with a nervous energy on the day of the chess tournament. The air was thick with the scent of lukewarm coffee and the hushed whispers of players strategizing their opening moves. Miles, clutching his worn wooden chessboard, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He'd never participated in a formal tournament before. The sheer number of people, the clicking of clocks, the intense focus on every face. It was overwhelming. He found his assigned table, a small folding one in a corner of the crowded hall. His first few matches were a blur of concentration. He played with a quiet intensity, his mind racing through possibilities, his fingers moving the pieces with a practiced grace that belied his nervousness. He won his first game, then his second, each victory a small boost to his wavering confidence. Between rounds, he couldn't help but scan the room, his eyes searching for a familiar, unwelcome face. He spotted Kevin near the refreshment table, surrounded by his usual group. Kevin noticed Miles too, and a smirk spread across his face. He mouthed the words, "Still playing with toys, Corbin?" Miles looked away, trying to ignore the familiar sting of the taunt. As the day progressed, Miles continued his unexpected winning streak. He faced older, more experienced players, but his focused concentration and his deep understanding of strategy allowed him to navigate complex positions and emerge victorious. Word began to spread about the quiet kid from Englewood who was upsetting the established order. In the late afternoon, as the final rounds approached, the pairings were announced. Miles's heart skipped a beat when he saw his name listed against one particular opponent. Mr. Thompson, the reigning state champion, Kevin's father. A wave of fear washed over him. This was it. The daunting figure he'd heard so much about, the man whose chess prowess Kevin constantly used to belittle him, was now his opponent. He glanced over at Kevin, who was watching him with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "Well, well, well," Kevin sneered as Miles walked past. "Looks like Silent Bob finally bit off more than he can chew. Dad's gonna wipe the floor with you." Miles didn't respond. He walked towards the table where Mr. Thompson was already seated, his expression serious and focused. Mr. Thompson was a tall man with a stern face and piercing eyes that seemed to analyze everything around him. He nodded curtly at Miles as he sat down. The atmosphere around their table seemed to shift. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the unexpected pairing of the unknown teenager and the renowned champion. The clicking of the chess clocks seemed to grow louder, the tension in the room palpable. Before the game began, Mr. Thompson looked at Miles, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "So, you're the young man who's been causing quite a stir today," he said, his voice deep and resonant. Miles simply nodded, his throat suddenly dry. The game began. Mr. Thompson, playing with the white pieces, opened with a classic move. Miles responded with a solid defense. The initial moves were played quickly, each player establishing their positions, probing for weaknesses. As the game progressed, Miles felt a surprising sense of calm settle over him. The fear hadn't completely vanished, but it was overshadowed by the intense focus required by the complex game unfolding before him. He drew upon everything Grandpa Earl had taught him, every strategy he had studied in the old leather-bound book. Mr. Thompson played with precision and power, his moves reflecting years of experience and deep tactical understanding. But Miles was not intimidated. He played with a quiet resilience, defending skillfully, patiently waiting for an opportunity. The middle game was a tense battle of attrition. Pieces were exchanged, the board becoming more open, the possibilities more intricate. The crowd around their table grew larger, their hushed whispers punctuated by the occasional sharp intake of breath as a surprising move was made. Miles noticed Kevin watching intently from the edge of the crowd, his earlier smirk replaced by a look of growing unease. He could feel Kevin's disbelief, the unspoken question in his eyes. How is this happening? As the game reached its climax, the tension in the room was almost unbearable. Both players had made mistakes, but the position was finely balanced. Miles, playing with the black pieces, saw a subtle weakness in Mr. Thompson's defense, a tiny crack in the seemingly impenetrable wall. A daring plan began to form in his mind, a risky maneuver that could either lead to a swift victory or a crushing defeat. He took a deep breath, his hand hovering over a knight. He could feel the weight of the moment, the expectations of the onlookers, the silent judgment of Kevin. But he also felt a surge of inner strength, a quiet confidence born from hours of practice, and the unwavering belief in his own abilities. He moved his knight, A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was an unexpected move, a sacrifice that seemed to put Miles at a disadvantage. Mr. Thompson stared at the board, his brow furrowed in concentration. He analyzed the new position, his eyes darting back and forth across the squares. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic ticking of the chess clocks. Finally, Mr. Thompson made his reply, a move that Miles had anticipated. With a series of precise and calculated moves, Miles pressed his attack. He had foreseen this sequence, had mapped it out in his mind several moves earlier. The sacrifice of the knight had opened up a pathway for his other pieces, creating an unstoppable threat to Mr. Thompson's king. A look of dawning realization spread across Mr. Thompson's face. He saw the trap, the elegant checkmate that Miles had so skillfully orchestrated. He studied the board one last time, searching for a way out. But there was none. With a sigh, Mr. Thompson extended his hand across the table. "Checkmate," he said, his voice quiet but respectful. A stunned silence hung in the air for a moment, followed by a burst of murmurs and applause. Miles, his heart pounding in his chest, shook Mr. Thompson's hand. He had done it. He, the quiet kid from Englewood, had defeated the reigning state champion. He looked up and saw Kevin standing frozen, his mouth agape, his face a mask of disbelief. The earlier arrogance had completely vanished, replaced by a stunned incomprehension. As Miles began to pack his chessboard, Mr. Thompson approached him. "Young man," he said, his eyes now filled with genuine respect, "that was an excellent game. You have a remarkable talent." Miles, still a little overwhelmed, managed a small smile. "Thank you, sir." "I underestimated you," Mr. Thompson admitted, extending his hand again. "You have a bright future in this game." Kevin watched the exchange, his earlier taunts now echoing in the sudden silence of his own realization. He had always defined Miles by his quietness, his perceived weakness. He had never seen the strategic brilliance that lay hidden beneath the surface. And now, that brilliance had not only defeated his father, but had also exposed his own shallow judgment. As Miles walked out of the tournament hall, the setting sun casting long shadows across the parking lot, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced before. He hadn't just won a chess game. He had won a small victory over the fear and self-doubt that had plagued him for so long. He had found his voice, not in shouting, but in the silent eloquence of a well-played game. And in the stunned silence of his bully, he heard a different kind of message, one that spoke volumes about the power of quiet strength and unexpected brilliance. The days following the chess tournament were different for Miles. At school, the hallways felt a little wider, the stairs a little less sharp. The news of his victory over Mr. Thompson had spread like wildfire. Even the teachers looked at him with a newfound respect. The quiet kid from Englewood had done the unthinkable. Kevin, however, was conspicuously silent. He avoided Miles's gaze in the hallways and kept a wide berth in the cafeteria. His usual swagger seemed to have deflated, replaced by a brooding quietness that mirrored Miles's own former demeanor. One afternoon, as Miles was heading to the library, he saw Kevin sitting alone on a bench outside the school, his head in his hands. Hesitantly, Miles approached him. Kevin looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. He seemed surprised to see Miles. "What do you want?" he mumbled, his voice lacking its usual aggressive edge. Miles sat down on the other end of the bench, a comfortable silence settling between them for a moment. I just wanted to see if you were okay," Miles said softly. Kevin scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Okay? My dad, the great Mr. Thompson, got beat by you. Everyone's talking about it. It's humiliating." Miles nodded slowly. He understood the pressure Kevin must be feeling, the weight of his father's reputation. "Your dad was a great player," Miles said sincerely. "It was a tough game. I saw an opportunity." Kevin remained silent for a while, staring at the cracked pavement. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's been really hard on me about chess, always pushing me, saying I need to be as good as him, better even. But I don't even really like it that much." Miles listened patiently, surprised by Kevin's vulnerability. He had always seen Kevin as the confident bully, never considering the pressures he might be facing. "He was so angry after you won," Kevin continued, his voice trembling slightly. "He didn't yell, but the way he looked at me, like I had failed him." A wave of empathy washed over Miles. He realized that Kevin's bullying might have stemmed from his own insecurities, the pressure to live up to his father's expectations. "It's okay not to like someone just because your parents do," Miles said gently. "It's your life, your interests." Kevin looked up at Miles, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. It was as if no one had ever said those words to him before. You're not even gloating," Kevin said, a hint of his old defensiveness returning. "You beat my dad, and you're not even rubbing it in." Miles shook his head. "What would be the point? It was just a game. A really important game for me, but still, just a game." Another silence fell between them, this one less tense, more contemplative. Then Kevin did something truly unexpected. He looked at Miles, his eyes filled with a raw honesty that Miles had never seen before. I'm sorry, Corbin," he said, the words seeming to catch in his throat. "For all the stuff I did, the bullying. It wasn't right." Miles stared at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. He had imagined this moment many times, a confrontation filled with anger and accusations. He had never expected an apology, especially not one that sounded so genuine. It's okay, Kevin," Miles said slowly, the words feeling a little awkward. "No, it's not," Kevin insisted, shaking his head. "I was a jerk. I was insecure, and I took it out on you because you were quiet, and I thought you wouldn't fight back." He paused, then added, almost in a whisper, "But you did fight back. Just not in the way I expected." Miles nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. His victory on the chessboard had been a silent but powerful form of resistance, one that had not only surprised everyone else, but had also forced Kevin to confront his own behavior. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to change. Kevin still wasn't Miles's best friend, but the bullying stopped. There was a newfound respect in Kevin's eyes when he saw Miles, a hesitant acknowledgement of his talent and his quiet strength. One day, Kevin even approached Miles in the library. "Hey, Corbin," Kevin said, his voice tentative. You still play chess in here?" Miles looked up from his book, surprised to see Kevin standing there. "Yeah, sometimes," he replied, a hint of caution in his voice. Kevin shuffled his feet. "My dad, he's been trying to get me to play more. He even showed me some of your moves from the tournament. Said you have a unique style." A faint blush crept up Kevin's neck as he said the last part. Miles felt a small smile tug at the corner of his lips. "It's just about seeing the possibilities," he said. Maybe. Kevin hesitated, then took a deep breath. Maybe you could… I don't know. Maybe you could show me some things sometime. Not like lessons or anything. Just a game? Miles looked at Kevin, really looked at him. He saw not the arrogant bully of the past, but a young man struggling to find his own path, trying to connect in a way he hadn't known how before. "Sure, Kevin," Miles said, his voice warm. "I'd be happy to play a game with you." And so, in the quiet corner of the Englewood Library, an unlikely connection began to form over the checkered board. They weren't instant friends, and the past wasn't erased overnight. But they started to see each other differently. Kevin began to appreciate the quiet intensity that Miles brought to the game, the way his mind worked, the unexpected brilliance of his strategies. Miles, in turn, saw a vulnerability in Kevin that he hadn't noticed before, a yearning for acceptance, and a struggle to escape the shadow of his father's expectations. The scholarship Miles won from the tournament helped his family immensely, easing some of the financial burdens they carried. He continued to play chess, his talent blossoming with each game. He even joined the school's chess club, and to his surprise, Kevin joined too. They often found themselves analyzing games together, their shared interest creating a bridge between their previously antagonistic worlds. Mr. Thompson, though initially disappointed by his loss, eventually came to respect Miles's skill. He even approached Miles at one of the later chess club meetings, offering him some advanced pointers and acknowledging his talent. It was a moment of unexpected grace, a sign that even the most entrenched perceptions could be changed by genuine talent and quiet determination. Miles never forgot the sting of Kevin's bullying, but he also recognized the power of his response, not through anger or retaliation, but through excelling in his passion. His bravery wasn't in shouting down his tormentor, but in quietly pursuing his own strengths, in finding his voice on the silent squares of the chessboard. Years passed. Miles went on to college, his chess skills opening doors and providing opportunities. He studied computer science, his strategic mind finding new avenues of expression in the world of algorithms and code. He never forgot his roots in Englewood or the lessons he learned in the quiet corner of the library. One day, years later, Miles returned to Chicago for a visit. He stopped by his old high school and, to his surprise, saw Kevin volunteering at a school event. Kevin, now taller and with a more thoughtful demeanor, recognized Miles immediately. "Miles! Wow! It's been a long time," Kevin said, a genuine smile lighting up his face. They talked for a while, catching up on their lives. Kevin shared that he had found his passion in photography and was working as a freelance photographer. He admitted that chess had never truly been his thing, and he was much happier pursuing his own creative interests. Before they parted ways, Kevin said something that resonated deeply with Miles. "You know, Miles," he said, looking thoughtful, "what you did back then, beating my dad. It wasn't just about chess. It showed me that people are more than just what they seem on the surface. That quiet people can be incredibly strong. You made me think." Miles smiled. "We all have our own strengths, Kevin," he said. "Sometimes it just takes time to find them." As Miles walked away from the school that day, the rumble of the L train a familiar sound in the background, he felt a profound sense of peace. His story wasn't just about a chess prodigy defeating a champion. It was about the quiet power of resilience, the unexpected ways in which strength can manifest, and the transformative potential of kindness and understanding. It was a reminder that even in the face of bullying and prejudice, true superiority lies not in dominance or aggression, but in the quiet dignity of pursuing one's passion and the bravery of being oneself. And sometimes, the most powerful move is not on the board, but in the way we choose to respond to the challenges life throws our way. The quiet squares of Inglewood had indeed nurtured a silent revolution, one that had rippled outwards, touching not just Miles's life, but the life of the boy who once sought to dim his light. And that, Miles thought, was a victory far more satisfying than any checkmate. Thank you for watching.